and welcome to this session of What Makes a £1,000,000 Bottle of Whisky. We are joined today here by Joe Wilson from the Whisky Auctioneer, Gemma Patterson from the Balvenie, and Jeff Kirk from the Macallan. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to talk in this session about whisky collecting and how that's booming at the moment, and just how people are starting to build up collections of whisky. And for people that don't have any experience in this at all, where could they maybe start and what could they do? And we'll talk about a bit of the stories behind the bottles that you are seeing in the news that are making record sums as well. Joe, you could kick us off with your experience at the Whisky Auctioneer. You must see quite a lot of really rare and collectible bottles coming your way.
Yeah, every day. I always say to people, it's such a privilege to work here. We see probably in the region of 7,000 to 8,000 bottles every month. That's more bottles than most people will see in a lifetime. We see in just a kind of 30-day stretch. So, working for Whisky Auctioneer in particular is great because we get such an incredible diversity of bottles coming through the auction. Everything from price points in the kind of affordable £20 to £50 range, obviously all the way up to that £1,000,000 bottle that we sold earlier this year. So it's an incredible experience for anybody who is interested in whiskey like myself. It's an amazing place to work, and I try through my job as best I can to kind of translate that into the experience for people in our auctions by creating, very much an exhibition of whiskey as much as an auction of whiskey that people can browse through and learn about these kind of rare bottles. Particularly, they're not always going to be in people's price points, but they might still be interested to find out what makes it valuable or what makes it so interesting. So we try quite hard to do that here.
So where are all these bottles coming from? That's a vast amount that you're getting in. Where are you seeing them coming in?
Every corner of the world. Obviously, we've just opened up a second office in Europe, so we're increasing our presence over there as well. We've got registered sellers and buyers in, I think, about 120 different countries. So it's truly an international platform, and it's accessible for everybody who has an internet connection and is able to get the bottles shipped out to them if they buy them. So it's a big operation. It's a great thing to be involved in, and it's great to be able to give as many people as possible the chance to be involved in that as well.
And how does it play with you with the brand? So if you get a bottle that's come in that's very rare, very, very collectible, and do you reach out to them to say you've got this private sale on and to see what they kind of think about it? What's the kind of input there?
In the last year or so, we've been working more closely with distilleries through the Pat's Whisky Collection, which is one of the biggest private collections of whisky ever to be brought to auction, has opened up quite a lot of opportunities for us to work with brands. We've obviously worked with the Balvenie with Gemma, and we've worked with Jeff through the Perfect Collection to sell the 1926 Fine and Rare as well. But generally, most of the work for the auctions is done in-house. We don't tend to look too much further afield for input there, but we have a big job on our hands to ensure that the bottles are authentic, to make sure that they're presented correctly, and then obviously there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes work to make sure all the bottles get sent off to the right places afterwards as well.
And Gemma, from your perspective there, obviously Joe mentioned that doing work with yourselves and the Balvenie there. So how does that kind of manifest itself from your perspective, from a kind of brand point of view? Obviously you are not on this earth when these bottles were actually created, but yeah, how does it work in the modern world?
Yeah, definitely far from that, Eric. So one of the bottles that Joe and the team had over at Whisky Auctioneer this year was the Balvenie 1937, which was bottled in 1987 by Milroy's. And so this is just a really nice example of kind of what the Whisky Auctioneer asking us that question to kind of go back and look into what's the story behind this bottling. So then we go back and consult in our archives and try to dig out information on these bottles. And so I'm sure, Jeff, you're well aware of what this process is like. There's a few that turned up in Richard Gooding's collection that were just like, wow, okay, right, what is the story behind this? Because we had no idea. So it's just a matter of digging and trying to discover what happened, how this ended up bottled. So yeah, I love the story behind the 37. That was basically Jack Milroy came up to Balvenie back in the 80s and was wandering about, and he was with Peter Gordon, one of the family members, fifth generation family member, William Grant's. And he said to Peter, "What are these casks in the corner?" And they're in this warehouse, have a pile of dusty old casks. And these were 4 casks from 1937. Now, Jack asked Peter if he could purchase those casks. So they were duly sold to him. He vatted them and sold them. There was around 400 bottles from that 1937 run, but that was the very first 50-year-old that we had put out. So 1987 bottled, and like a wonderful detail which we uncovered was that the very man who hand filled the casks back in 1937 from the warehouse team, he came back to the distillery and hand bottled every single bottle in 1987, and he was 88 years old at the time.
Oh, I love
So
that.
with supervision.
With supervision. So I uncovered an old newspaper article from a local paper talking about the process and this bottling. Just amazing.
That's fantastic. Those stories really bring those bottles to life, don't they? And Jeff, from your perspective as well, obviously the Perfect Collection, that was a huge thing, wasn't it? Give us a bit of background on that.
To Gemma's point just before, so much of how a lot of these whiskies have come about has been circumstantial. Going back in time, the industry in general, and I think specific distilleries wouldn't have had a sense of what they're creating in that moment, and what it's going to mean to the brand and the business and to collectors and the wider interest in the single malt category. So it is genuinely fascinating to hear the backstories, how they've come about, what it means in heritage terms for all the brands. So that's and a lot of that has been facilitated by the likes of Richard Gooding, with a very personal passion, and obviously the ability to travel to Scotland so frequently as he did back in the day, and just step by step, slowly, obviously at a very high level, but being able to build up a collection just through personal passion. And I think it says a lot, in a sense, that he was interested in retaining the bottles, not necessarily the packaging for some of those products. So it was all about the whiskey and the intense passion for the primary product, if you like, not too worried about the presentation. So it was fascinating to see that come back into the world, which some of the collectors have chosen to do. Obviously, it's a financial decision, but I know some of the statements were very much about a desire to bring those bottles back to life, almost, and to bring them to new consumers, new collectors who have that passion, but they want to step back in time, maybe of not my era, Gemma's era, where they weren't around when some of those whiskies were distilled and put into cask. Some, unfortunately for me, some of them were when I was alive.
What can we expect to see in the future? The processes, I suppose, it's maybe a bit more led by industry now, and there's maybe not as many backstories with releases now. Would you agree with that, or is there still going to be these amazing whiskies that we can expect to kind of find in 20, 30 years' time?
I mean, the industry, even just within Scotch single malt, it's so diverse, and there's a lot of new players coming into the mix. I think it's still for years and possibly decades to come, it will have a bit of something for everyone, depending on what people's tastes are. Of course, there are the very limited edition collectibles in multiple brands, and even if we look at the Japanese whiskies and some American whiskies might go the same way. Pappy Van Winkle's already there in terms of collectability. So my sense is that there should be space for every type of collector, depending on how accessible they need the whiskies to be. It just depends why they're collecting. Are they collecting for out-and-out investment purposes? Are they collecting out of a love for the whiskey first and foremost and the whiskey style? Or are they collecting out of a collectability mindset? Do they have to pick one distillery or pick one theme? And do they have to have everything within that theme? Is that their thing for collecting? So I certainly hope there should be a lot of scope for all different types of collectors going forward.
Just to add to that quickly, Eric, like as Jeff said, you've got so many different eras, right, of whiskey making. And going back, like if you look at what's happening today in the industry to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it doesn't necessarily have to be a 50-year-old bottle and to have a story. So, you know, even going back and looking at the team who were working at Balvenie and at Macallan 20 years ago, there's stories that you can pick out there and things that happened, trials that happened, or even just things that happened around the distillery, because they're like living, breathing spaces. So I think one of the exciting jobs now about putting together whiskies that are collectible and that have a collectability is taking whiskies that, you know, unpicking the stories from the past and marrying them with stories from the present. So looking at like who we collaborate with to then work on that final packaging and that bottling and do that story and heritage and provenance of the whiskey justice to kind of get it out there and end up on somebody's shelf and glass hopefully one day.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? Do you prefer to see them open it, Gemma, and consume it and really enjoy it, or if it's sitting there and it's still sealed, you know?
Like at the end of the day, it's all made to be drunk. So you'd like to think that one day, no matter what you spend on a bottle, will be open to celebrate something special. But I mean, I don't know about opening some of these £1 million Macallans. That's a big responsibility to open a bottle like that. So
true.
I think for me, it's one of the things that makes the whiskey industry such an inviting place to invest in the first place, is because it is so engaging and interactive, and you can, if you taste something that you enjoy and you buy a case of 6 of them, you can maybe open a couple, and then if you put the other 4 in the cupboard, maybe 10, 15 years down the line, it might be worth a bit more money. And you know, when you look at the other kind of portfolios that you can invest your money in, there's not that kind of love affair with like stocks and shares, for example, that you can get from building up a portfolio of whiskey. You know, you can, you know, as Gemma said, you can visit the distilleries, you can talk to the staff, you can uncover the stories behind them, and these are all things that, you know, will drive your enthusiasm for it and keep you interested in it, as well as, you know, being able to enjoy the product itself, whether, you know, your end game is to you know, hide them away for 10, 15 years to see if the money generates, or whether, you know, you just want to have that one bottle that you love available to you for the rest of your life. So,
and Joe, are you seeing the types of people that are coming to you to either buy or with collections? Is the type of person changing?
I don't know if it's necessarily changing, but it's definitely broadening. I think there has always been that core group of traders and collectors who'll always be interested in this, but it's becoming more and more popular. And obviously there is massive scope for people to invest and make money, particularly in the shorter term at the moment as well. But even if you know, you do have these clients who maybe approach it from a kind of money-driven angle, who maybe didn't know that much about whiskey but have seen an opportunity to make money, you know, more often than not, it becomes an avenue for them to become interested in whiskey, because you want to develop an interest in what you are spending your money on. And, you know, I've been on that journey with some of our clients here who maybe have come in with a few bottles and not known much about it, and then within 12 months they can rattle off all the facts about the distilleries and all the information about these. And, you know, it's good to see that people, I think, invariably will succumb to the charm of the liquid, and that, you know, there is more to it for everybody involved than just the money. So it's nice.
I think on that point as well, Joe, that it's an interesting way in, as you have said, and what we observe in the auction space and the investment space is obviously those iconic bottles. But from our purposes, for Gemma and myself and our other peers within the industry, if it does get that consumer, that client, into the brand, into the whiskey range, and they're going to start to evangelize, whether it's from an investment perspective, just loving the brand, or really enjoying the whiskey. Again, if that's at the 12 years old level, and that's what they enjoy on a week-to-week basis, that's still very powerful for the brand, and it's powerful for the industry. So there are lots of different ways for clients and consumers to get into a brand. This is just one of them, which is, it just adds to the richness, I guess, of the audiences that we appeal to.
I love unpicking some of the stories behind some of our collectors and why they become collectors, because I think like the mind of a collector is a really fascinating thing, and like Joe said, there's a few different avenues into how you get there. And we've got someone on Balvenie who I would say is like one of our kind of the most memorable collectors that I've ever met, and he was gifted a bottle in the 90s, and he then went to figure out where this bottle was from and what it meant, and he realized that this was a Balvenie that had been kind of discontinued in the 80s, and it was a limited edition. And then from there, that sparked this journey where he was like, I want to collect more. And so throughout the 90s, he started collecting as many bottles of Balvenie as he could. And then that kind of goes to the present day. So he tries to get a hold of anything that he can afford from Balvenie. And he's just like immensely passionate about the distillery and the people there, and comes every year, obviously apart from last year, but has gone on to write a book about Balvenie and has written a book that's like a comprehensive collection of all the bottles that we've released. And I use this book as a Bible. So, when I first started in the global role, and certainly been asked to, what's this bottle worth? Is this bottle collectible? Then I would go back and consult this book that one of our collectors gave me, because it's just amazing that he took the time to put this together. But yeah, it's incredible that someone could find a bottle that's collectible and grow a passion from that then kind of lasts a lifetime.
If you were to suggest or offer up your own personal opinion on the kind of range, the Balvenie range, to somebody who was maybe going to start a collection, what would you start them off with, Gemma?
It's a no-brainer. It would be like a kind of current range now. It would be the stories range that we've been working on with Balvenie over the last few years, because some of them are, like just gems from the past, things that where the stories range has really been put together to showcase Balvenies and to have a space for Balvenies that we might necessarily that are limited, but like we don't have a place for kind of within the wider range. So for example, we've got a Balvenie that was distilled in 1992 using 100% roasted malt. Some of it malted ourselves in our malting, some of it bought in, and that was only 100 casks filled that year, and it was a one-off trial, never happened again. And then fast forward to 1999, and we had a batch of Balvenie that we experimented in our floor maltings with. That Balvenie was 100% estate grown, estate malted, and then we used a batch of spring heather in the kiln to dry that barley. And again, only filled 50 casks with that trial, rested in the warehouse and went on. So it was really a way to kind of take these limited Balvenies, tell the story kind of about them and how they were put together, and celebrate that it's something limited, it won't be around forever, but also I guess they're pretty accessible within the range, so they're not like going into sort of 50-year-old echelons. You're looking at, like, dependent on which variant, is under £1,000 a bottle, so rather than megabucks to pick up. So
yeah, that's good. One for the shopping list, wish list. How about yourself, Jeff, from the Macallan range? Is there anything there that you'd have down?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting earlier this year, the news reports that came out in Scotland about the father who had collected for his son from his year of birth of the Macallan 18 years old. And something as seemingly innocuous like that, at the time, going back 18 years, has obviously matured and grew from a value, but from a passion perspective, into something much bigger than just the sum of 18 bottles. Consumers could choose to do that, of go the 18 years old route. It'll always be there. It's the iconic, relatively accessible Macallan expression. The additions range for us, which was very whiskey focused on different styles of the Macallan. Again, as Gemma said, to be opened and consumed, but of course we recognise people will want to collect or do both if they can get 2 bottles at a minimum. That's the additions range has now come to a conclusion with edition number 6, but there will be something in the same space, so it'll have to be a watch this space. going forward from an accessible perspective. And obviously with the Macallan, we stretch to the higher end, as an understatement sometimes. So that's inherently is not always single cask, but inherently very restricted and very scarce. So, and that's reflected in through the demand, that's reflected in the price. So the Red collection launched very recently. That will continue over the years. So whether it's those who are fortunate just to be able to secure the one bottle, or those who are very fortunate to be able to afford more than that, that's certainly one that will continue for a while. And I think the fine and rare, Macallan Fine and Rare, whether it's the miniature or the full bottles, I mean, that is obviously an absolute classic range within the industry. And it tends to be a very passion-oriented purchase for people who are focused on the year, they focus on the vintage. And it could be a year of birth, year of their marriage, and you know, maybe company-oriented if they're a business owner. They might look to years that are relevant to them very personally. Those tend to stay with the individuals. Obviously, we see some fine and rare gets resold through whiskey auctioneers and other sites and houses. But just as many of those get retained because they're such a passion purchase in the first place.
Any insights, any behind the sort of scenes tips that you would offer? Anything coming up?
I mean, I think the most important thing for anybody to do if they're looking at collecting and investing in whiskey is to be as engaged with it as possible, is to drink whiskey, to try whiskey, to talk to people about it, and to learn the stories. Obviously brands like Macallan are always going to be well known, are always going to be popular and a fairly safe investment for people. But when you look at bottles that are kind of creep up in value over years, the ones that may be the kind of more innocuous purchases today, but have, through word of mouth and people talking about how high quality the whiskey is, these are the things that become incredibly valuable to people 10, 15, 20 years down the line. When you look at independent bottlings of like old Cadenhead's bottles or the Samaroli imports to Europe, these were very small amounts of bottles, often into kind of small niche marketplaces, and they only really command the incredible values that they do now because people were able to open them and try them and have talked about how incredible these are. So I think you just have to know your stuff, learn your history, look for these close distilleries, but also keep your ear to the ground in the present day for the kind of bottlings that are making waves at the moment.
Yeah, there's so many bottles where like hindsight would have been a wonderful thing, right? Like, and I've got colleagues who have picked up some bottles of Balvenie over the years, and wow, wish like that they had gotten more or hadn't drunk them and opened them. So, for example, the ton range with Balvenie, ton 1401, which then evolved to become ton 1509, that very first batch of ton 1401 launched in 2010, distillery exclusive, around £100 a bottle. You had to come and do the tour at Balvenie to be able to buy a bottle, and now you'd be looking at 5,000 plus at auction probably for that ton bottle, in which no one would have foreseen it at the time. And yeah, there's not that many bottles of 1401 batch 1 left out there now. I think a lot did get open and drunk. So,
but Gemma, there's also those colleagues, I'm sure you have the same, who think back with a different degree of hindsight, who had the bottle and consumed it, which is great, or who had a bottle and gifted it, which is maybe slightly more painful.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. It was really interesting hearing all the backstories and just getting some insights in there, and I think it'll be really useful to the World Whisky Day audience that'll be watching this as we speak.